takes more, don't quote me on this, but it's more energy to break down. And so rather than just like the easily processed sugars that we see in like chocolate milk and that kind of thing. So, and
Is that
protein
good or
content
bad
as well.
estimate?
That would go to the argument that we should be allowing for things like whole milk and higher percent fat milk. Exactly, versus like the high sugar.
So could we like give our opinion to the feds on this one?
I think it's certainly within our rights to do whatever we want.
As a body, I
Lose your battle.
Yeah, right. I'm not sure how effective it would be, and we want to think about prioritizing. But maybe after we've gone through the conversation and heard from other folks, we'll be able to get more information about it, provide some context, and I think we've talked about having school nutrition folks coming in, and it would be interesting to hear from them. What are people actually taking on the line, and what are you hearing from kids about what they would like to have that you don't have?
I think Rodney might remember better, but the one letter I remember what you're writing was about beverage versus milk, like almond milk, soy milk.
Yeah.
So we sent a strongly worded letter. Yeah, with a very specific definition that it had to be the lacteal secretion of mammals. And
They really took that to heart.
yeah, they do.
Yeah.
Really
Well, as I said, we'll leave that for now and switch gears. We will come back to that. But for the rest of the day, we've got some guests with us from rural Vermont.
That's correct.
All right. Step right up, and why don't we have you introduce yourself? Is it Graham?
Yes.
Graham, if you want to just give us a quick introduction, and then if there's others on remotely who are with you, you can have them introduce themselves, and then we'll go around the table and give you quick introductions here, and then we'll let you begin.
Excellent. Well, thank you everybody for having us here today. My name is Graham Unang-Strufernacht. I'm the policy director at Rural Vermont. We have 5 staff at our organization. We are all part-time employees, and we are a horizontally led organization, which means we are all directors. And we have a very peer-related relationship with our board as well. I will not give you too much more information about the organization before I just pass it over, I guess, to Caroline and Evan. I guess the last thing I'll say about myself is that I'm also a small farmer. I'm a grazer. I lease land in Calais. I also recently, about 3 years ago, purchased into a land cooperative in Marshfield where I live with my wife and child, Juniper, who's 2.5 years old. And with that, Caroline or Evan, maybe let's pass it off to Caroline to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Graham. Hello, dear committee. I just noticed that my camera seems to be broken. I'll try it again, but it might start zipping around soon, and then I'll turn it off. So there you go. But you've seen me once. I'm sorry I couldn't be here today, given that the committee, that you have so many new members. I'm promising I'll pop in for an in-person hello tomorrow morning. So my name is Caroline Gordon. I'm Rural Vermont's legislative director and a beginning sheep farmer, and live in the town of Tunbridge, where I currently raise 20 ewe lambs. I'm a dual citizen, German-American, was born in Bonn, Germany in 1989. I lived in Vermont since 2017 and am a Vermont Law School graduate with a Master's of Law in Food and Agriculture Law and Policy. So you'll see me in the State House maybe as the face of rural Vermont during the legislative process. But as Graham said, we're a horizontal led organization, so we don't have an executive director. And Graham, our policy director, is also a registered lobbyist for rural Vermont, and so is our grassroots organizing director, Molly Willis, who's our lead staff on dairy. So please reach me anytime, though, via phone or email on issues, any of the issues relating to rural Vermont. I'm happy to get you in touch with any of our staff and get back to you as soon as possible, if not immediately. And I'm glad that Evan's here today as well. Being the eyes and ears for our membership on the ground, we can't do by ourselves. So we have often interns. This year, Evan is our legislative intern. He's also a rural Vermont member, and he has been a citizen activist in the past. from slaughter. He, as a farm worker, is someone who's interested in that issue himself. So I'll pass it on to Evan.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, my name is Evan Hoyt. I'm super grateful to be here. Also, sorry to not be in person. I'll be back in the country soon, and then can stop taking notes via YouTube, and hopefully we'll be in the room sometimes. I live in Huntington. I raise vegetables and help out with some livestock operations. I'm a student at UVM. I study food systems, systems thinking, leadership, and a lot of my life and work is kind of oriented around off-market food systems and community building. So just trying to be helpful to rural Vermont this legislative session, and glad to be listening in. Thanks.
Nice to meet you both, and we look forward to seeing you here at some point and in person. And we'll just go around quickly, and I'll ask the Vice Chair, Representative Supernaut, to go first, and maybe just say, anything that might be relevant to the work of rural Vermont too. So.
Sure. Kyle, nice to see you again. Heather Supernaut. I'm in the Windsor 4 district, Barnard, Pomfret, and Bridgewater, and I'm a small organic vegetable and dairy farmer. So very connected to the work that you all do.
Hi, my name is Esme Cole. I represent Windsor 6, and I am from Hartford, Vermont, and I represent them. It is not considered rural, so to speak, but it is at a juncture and transportation point where many rural communities come together on like 89. And rural economy is critical for Vermont, so thank you.
Hello, again, John O'Brien, represent Royalton and Tunbridge. Have a sheep farm and wedding business there, so agritourism, on-farm accessory businesses. On-farm slaughter, right?
Mike Rice, represent the Bennington Rutland District, live in Dorset, also represent Danby, Mount Tabor, Landgrove, and Peru. I am also a food and ag law and policy grad from VLS, and have worked in conjunction with the NOFA Vermont folks, working the Massachusetts chapter of NOFA.
I'm Josie Levitt. I represent Grand Isle County and a sliver of West Milton. And I live in Grand Isle, and I'm very active in the food resiliency aspect of this committee because I'm on the board of our local food shelf, and we're trying to figure out how to use more food from our county and the food shelf for feeding folks.
I'm David Templeman, Orleans 3. I'm a regenerative sheep farmer.
I'm Charles Wilson from Caledonia 3, which is Lindenville, Sheffield, Sutton, New York. And I represent a lot of rural people.
Henry Pearl, I represent the Caledonia, Washington district, and I'm a dairy farmer in Danville.
I'm Jed Lipsky, Lamoille 1, town of Stowe, and my life has been based as a logging contractor from teenage years to present, and so forest ecology and forest management is what my specialty is.
Rodney Graham, Orange 3, representing Williamstown, Chelsea, was a former organic dairy farmer, now I raise organic beef and crop.
And I'm David Durfee. I'm from Shaftesbury, Bennington 3 district. I represent Shaftesbury, Glastonbury, and parts of Sunderland. And I'm not a farmer, but I did I sort of jumped in at the last minute on a workshop that Rural Vermont put on a couple of weeks ago, and I owe somebody some money.
I'm unclaimed.
Yeah. So I will not let you leave without following up and making sure I know who to. It's been weighing on my conscience for. And some of you have met our committee assistant, Laura, in the corner here, who keeps everything running smoothly. You can see that we've got a whole host of new folks on the committee, and we're all very eager to learn about the work that you do and how it might pertain to the work we do. I'll let you launch from there.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. I'll say first of all, this is, I think, my first time testifying in person since 2020, early 2020. I have a 2.5-year-old daughter, like I said, so I've really been trying to protect ourselves. For us, it's hard to actually afford sick time, at some point. There's been a lot of sickness for those of you who are around people with families. So just acknowledging a little, this is my first time here in a while. This is the first time I think in this room, this committee. And I also just want to reflect that as an organization, we are pretty excited to see food resiliency in your new title. So to get into a little about the history of rural Vermont, and Caroline can help me clean up. I've personally been working here as a part-time employee since 2017. Before that, I was actually a member of the board and the chair of the board actually for a period of that time. Rural Vermont was founded in 1985. It's a statewide member-based farmer and farmer-led not-for-profit organization based here in Montpelier. We work primarily at the local and state levels. However, we also advocate and collaborate in national and international spaces through our membership of the National Family Farm Coalition, where I sit on the executive committee, and La Via Campesina, where our director of grassroots organizing, Molly Wills, is our primary liaison. So our mission is to organize, educate, and advocate in collaboration with local and global movements to strengthen the social, ecological, and economic health of the agrarian communities that connect us all. And we envision a just and equitable world rooted in reverence for the earth and dignity for all. This abundant and generous way of life celebrates our diversity and interdependence, in which communities of microorganisms, animals, plants, and humans tend one another and nurture generations to come. So there's the official spiel. And I think one thing I just wanted to emphasize in my initial introduction to the organization is that I'd just like to encourage you all to feel free to reach out. As a membership-based organization, we represent many of your constituents. And as you're hearing from different organizations which come through here, I'll just encourage you to keep in mind that some of us are member-based, not-for-profit organizations, and we're here directly representing those needs of those people. We're not here to represent profits or bottom lines for a company or anything. So I just wanted to put that out there, and acknowledge it. Our work since 1985 has really spanned a great deal of areas, a great deal of aspects of the Vermont food system. Started in what I think was originally known as the farm crisis of the 1980s, as many organizations all over the country started similar to ours. I was talking with Missouri Rural Action not long ago, and I believe they were founded in the same year. And many organizations we speak to were founded around this time. So we worked primarily with dairy at the beginning, but over time that's gone from working on international trade agreements to very local laws related to what we call food sovereignty, or the ability of communities to determine how they want their food systems to look. That could be related to on-farm poultry processing. It could be related to slaughtering animals on farm, raw milk production, any number of things which sort of give farmers and producers an equitable place in the food system and let communities work to determine how they want to do that themselves. And with that, I think I'll pass over to Caroline to sort of talk about what we are seeing as a lot of our work this biennium. And she'll pass it back to me to cover some issues. Because we are structured as we are as an organization, basically work is that myself and Caroline lead and co-lead on issues, myself and Molly lead and co-lead on issues, and Caroline and Molly lead and co-lead on issues. So for any particular issue, one of us, we each have some redundancy, but there's also primary contacts. And if we get into this, you're welcome to contact us individually or just as an organization to ask who to speak to about these things. So Caroline, if you're ready, I'm happy to pass it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Graham.
Oh, wait. Can I just say one more thing? Is it okay if I pass out?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I have this is our 2023 course of action, and it's just basically says a number of the issues we are working on. It's not, there are issues that aren't on there. There are issues we don't even know are going to pop up yet. But these are some of the ones that in November, we've been looking at, since November or before, we've been looking at and anticipating.
Graham, do we have if you haven't already sent a copy to Alora, we'll take that and put it on our website so that
public documents
happens to be watching later can see what we've got here.
Absolutely. Thank you. Ready for you, Caroline.
All right. Well, thank you, Graham. Just to add a little bit on about rural Vermont and the organizing strategies Graham mentioned, we are grounding all our policy priorities that you find in the handout directly in collaborations and coalitions basically composed of grassroots leadership. So we strive to amplify the needs of farms affected on the ground and are not influenced by the interests of corporations and other institutions like Graham mentioned. So that's because we're a farmer membership-based organization. And so we say it's important all policy discourses should be guided first and foremost by the needs of those affected by policy decisions. This is now also the policy of the state, is what I want to say, because Vermont adopted an environmental justice policy. And that means that policy decisions have to be grounded in meaningful participation in this context. So please keep that ambition in mind. And as you also seek to inform your policy decisions by other stakeholders, science, and other experts, in our advocacy, you will notice our mission to organize, educate, and advocate in the way we do really tries to relay the legislative process to everyone and the issues that affect our membership. And that we always aim for more participation and opportunity for farmer voices to be heard. So before we close today, I really look forward to discuss our Small Farm Action Day series with you. That's an event where we bring farmers into the committee room and that we collaborated on with this committee for many years in the past. And I hope that's something we can continue cultivating in the future too. So please interrupt me somehow as I start trotting along here. I have quite a bit to cover, but I'm also always happy to cut it short if that's preferred, of course. So I'll just start with the federal on-farm slaughter amendment. We have a petition with 600 plus signatories from over 38 plus states. That's an effort we're organizing with partner organizations, including the National Family Farm Coalition, the Farm and Ranch Freedom Alliance, the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund, and as I said, over 600 signatories. So we strive there to amend the Federal Meat Inspection Act to clarify what we think is outdated language about the personal use exemption, to more closely align that exemption with what's actually already standing USDA Food Safety and Inspection Service FSIS guidance. And state laws like Vermont's, which explicitly allow livestock owners to slaughter their animals on the farm where they were raised, or to hire an itinerant slaughterer to do that. This is something where the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets has expressed support for. So they also think this is something we need more clarity on directly in the federal law. So we hope that you can support as a committee express that support as well. Here's our direct ask. We need a joint letter from your committee with the Senate Ag Committee to shepherd this effort along. We will fly to DC early in February. On the 7th, we'll be there and talk to our federal delegation and other offices. And we hope to bring along a letter from the agency in support, but also of the Ag committees, as this is something, the legislature has been improving through lawmaking over the years since 2013. And the issue basically is there that currently people who really rely a part of their business on the personal use exemption, whether that's farmers selling livestock for on-farm slaughter, homesteaders who sell some of their livestock, itinerant slaughterers, or custom processors, they're all vulnerable when they base their decision on FSIS to uphold its standing 2018 guidance. Because guidance, that's something that can be changed so easily, especially with a change in administration. So in Vermont, we have this on-farm slaughter law, and it allows the use of itinerant slaughterers. But our agency actually thinks that in that point, our state law goes a little bit beyond what's technically permissible under federal law. So they're afraid that the FSIS thinks it could change their guidance and decide any given day that what we allow in Vermont is actually violating the FMIA. And so we are afraid that FSIS then would take steps to revoke Vermont's Equal To status. That's an agreement they have with the USDA for state inspection program that's administered by the Agency of Agriculture here. Yeah, and because of this danger, the state agency has issued new requirements for on-farm slaughter last January 6th in 2022 that make it now more difficult for livestock managers and meat processors, processing professionals to meaningfully use on-farm slaughter. These requirements include owners of livestock all need to be present during the slaughter, and they need to organize the itinerant slaughter's appearance and the transport of the carcasses themselves. At the same time, academic research on food systems says on-farm slaughter is actually, that's known as ethical meat. And there's been a recent publication on that, which references the Vermont General Assembly's decision to double the allowances for on-farm slaughter during the pandemic. It's an article that compares on-farm slaughter laws with of Quebec with Vermont's, and I have a reference to that in my notes for you. There was also a recent article in the Valley News about this whole campaign. I have a link here to the petition language to you. Right now we have 40% of our signatures coming from farmers and homesteaders, and there's many testimonials included from farmers that express what this advocacy means for them. And yeah, you might know Mary Lake. She's a great shepherd for also just gaining that interest back into the industry, fostering an interest in meat processing through demonstrating it in an ethical way. And we work together on workshops, and she will join us in this advocacy effort going to DC. So this is something I hope to touch base on with you soon. Any questions about that before I go to the next issue?
No, I think not. So, yep, we're good.
All right. I want to talk a little bit about payment for ecosystem services, conservation practices, and soil health. This is something we work on as part of the small farmer group that Kat Buxton, rural Vermont board member, representative of the Vermont Healthy Soils Coalition, and PES and Soil Health Working Group member, is organizing and facilitating. So this is something since 2019, you probably already heard about and maybe already start talking about, that there was this legislatively mandated payment for ecosystem services and soil health working group to explore ecosystem services, ways to measure them, what incentives already exist, and what farmers need to be more viable when adopting conservation practices. So in the 3-year working group process to assess whether a new financial incentive is even needed to promote these ecosystem services that we really need to see more of, the working group ended with a consensus to enhance the federal conservation stewardship program with additional rewards for Vermont farmers. So this is a direction the group took that our small farmer group was advocating for since 2020 with the so-called CSP Plus proposal. Currently, the status quo of existing direct and indirect incentives in agricultural programming is in large based on practice-based approaches. So the Payment for Ecosystem Services and Soil Health Working Group invested a lot of time and energy to explore what it means to measure and administer an outcome-based program could be really pursued to facilitate a more transactional compensation for measurable ecosystem service that farms generate, with an underlying goal to, save costs, because you would kind of know more directly what you get from the investment. That's kind of how it was talked about. In a parallel effort, also since 2019, the Northeast Extension Directors funded a regional report on ecosystem services and working lands practice and policy across the US Northeast. And that report documents results from an assessment of over 1,300 ecosystem service provisioning programs and policies that already exist across the US Northeast. So including Connecticut, Delaware, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Vermont, West Virginia, and the District of Columbia. That research applies a framework of landscape multifunctionality that is used to describe why a focus on measuring a single outcome or ecosystem service would be short-sighted. It identified 91 state programs in Vermont alone that already directly or indirectly incentivize ecosystem services. So stakeholders on the PES and Soil Health Working Group admitted in 2021 when the working group reconvened for an extended timeline, that they are overwhelmed themselves with the alphabet soup of existing agriculture support programs and the services available. They formed a subtask group focusing on program development, followed the recommendation of Rural Vermont that we made with a sign-on letter that was based on legal research from the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems to start over their extended timeline by grounding the work in the legislative charge to look into shortfalls of existing programs before considering the development of a new program. In that year, the small farmer group that Rural Vermont is part of submitted that CSP Plus proposal with the White River Conservation District, and that was developed in collaboration with Chonier Family Farm. In fall 2022, the PES Soil Health Working Group took a poll, and then the majority of their members favored an approach to amend and enhance existing programs versus developing a new outcome-based program. So November 1st, the group reached that consensus. And now is the goal to spend the $1 million that was already appropriated before July. And I think that will be a great challenge, but we're really excited to see that rolling out now. And I'm sure you'll hear from the working group members and leadership on that directly. And from the agency, you might already have received some of that info, what the payments include and what the goals are there. But just to continue a little bit more the thread of how Rural Vermont engaged in this process and where this goes. In the final stages of the process, the group then started to briefly discuss to also improve interface interoperability of agriculture programming by investing into streamlining access to existing programs in a single online platform. That's something Rural Vermont is really excited about because we think the shortfalls of existing programs and funding gaps, high administrative costs, the need for more technical assistance, that are all good reasons to further invest into a long-term vision for reforming kind of how the access to programs can be more effective, and the overview of the agricultural landscape can be easier translated so that the access is actually what, if more effectively, supports farm viability and then if also Vermont's climate resilience. So it is known that we need agriculture as a climate solution to leverage this potential. And of course, private investors are building also coalitions to develop solutions through private markets that would funnel their investments into farms. Some of those initiatives focus on measuring carbon that farms sequester to offset emissions from industry players elsewhere. As one of the largest farmer membership-based organizations, Rural Vermont knows that is not the intention of many farmers in Vermont to have their meaningful work for soil health be utilized to greenwash pollution elsewhere. We stand with our national and international partner organizations at NFFC and La Via Campesina to see carbon offsets and other market solutions alike as false solutions. We see initiatives alike as a threat to Vermont, aside from not meaningfully engaging farmers in the decision-making. Greenwashing would question the integrity and authenticity of the Vermont food movement's cultural spirit to relocalize our food system in an ethical way. For the Vermont legislature to continue to address issues related to agriculture, with the goal of making farming a viable path also for future generations, it will be key to ensure policy decisions are made in a democratic process and to honor land managers' interest in an equitable way when developing agricultural reforms, as well as to mitigate potential conflict interests around the creation of more bureaucratic burdens that don't pay off on the ground. So we aim to inform this body with farmer-led recommendations. And I think we all have shared goals, addressing pre-existing shortfalls of existing programs, to have a farmer-led public discourse, to gauge new programmatic solutions in alignment with the Vermont's environmental justice policy, and to acknowledge that farm viability is often especially out of reach for farms due to the lack of social welfare systems like healthcare and childcare. And this is something Graham and Molly can speak much better to than I. But there's also legislation on the go on these issues. And you just know Rural Vermont supports initiatives that aim to improve such services and sees opportunity in a universal income and fostering more ability to strive better as a farmer, farm worker, food service provider, technical service provider, meat processor, and in other food system careers. So on this issue, we'll have a panel discussion with Rural Vermont Board member Stephen Leslie, Earl Hadley, and Kat Buxton tomorrow, facilitated by NOFA New Hampshire from 7 to 9 p.m., where we would absolutely welcome you to join and help discuss. Would also could love to just deepen this discussion at another time, and potentially also with consideration with other stakeholders, like this research that I mentioned about existing programs and how they benefit ecosystem services. I have a reference in my notes for you for people to reach out in that regard. And also the conservation districts are just about to issue their report on a farmer listening session where many of the advocacy points we've made over the years that farmers expressed in this listening session in 2021 are now finally in a written form and available through that report that they will bring out very soon. So that's PES.
Let me just stop you there to see if anybody has questions on that section. And I think we do have a report now that just came out.
Absolutely.
One of many reports that came out over the weekend. So
it's a lot to digest, yeah.
Yeah, and it will be something that we focus on in the coming weeks. Any questions? Yes, Representative Templeman.
So regarding the payment for ecosystem services directly related to carbon offsets, I do understand that there's a real fraudulent issue there with, greenwashing and however, this could also be a system to bring in money for farmers. So I'm trying to balance the two arguments here in my own head around what would be ethically correct and what would be, beneficial in a monetary way for farmers. Can you talk on that a little more?
Happy to take a first step, but Graham, feel free to add. I think there's other legal instruments that can funnel money in a way that those that are locally affected are still the ones who are deciding what happens with that money, like a fund, for example. So we have the Working Lands Enterprise Fund, for example. Why can't Vermont craft a portfolio where investors from whatever couleur can give us all their money, but we have the local control over that money?
I'm happy to fill in a little bit there. And I think it's important to look at what are the structural barriers to all the issues we know of in farming, whether that's land access and long-term secure land access, whether that's farm succession, which you all are talking about a little earlier today, any number of things, the environmental outcomes of farms, the pay price. And I think where we're looking is that the primary solutions aren't necessarily creating new markets for investors. And we think those are largely investor-driven efforts. They're making structural reforms which actually create more equity and parity for farmers and for the greater eating population in general. So what's keeping the same people from affording the locally grown food is some of the same stuff that's keeping farmers from having a just and equitable livelihood, right? Lack of universal health care, lack of childcare and accessible, affordable child care, all types of care, elder care, even just antitrust, thinking about the way the public sector has divested itself of so much of its own financial wealth towards the private sector over the past 50 years. So when we're looking at solutions, for us, it feels like looking at those actors who have essentially worked to consolidate agribusiness over time, who often are financial players in a lot of those agribusiness companies, which are actively hurting producers. What can we do to re-empower the public sector and to meet the basic needs of people and put more money in everybody's pockets to support farmers, to support their businesses, et cetera? I think that when we look at what's been called payments for ecosystem services globally for a long time, we see mostly exploitative schemes in the global south, essentially land grabs relating from people creating ecological asset trusts and other types of ways of creating assets out of ecosystem services. And as such, essentially holding holding contracts to say those companies get to determine how that land is used over time and what services are valued, et cetera. So I'm happy to share some of those resources, which point to some of these programs being used over time. But our perspective is that these new market opportunities are generally not the best way to approach what are essential needs of farmers and non-farmers alike.
Good, okay. Well, I think this is again something we're going to want to dig into. So we may have you back in to hear more about those resources and other illustrations anyway. Okay, I think if you wanted to keep going then.
Right. Thank you so much for that question too, Representative Templeman. So the next issue is Act 41, on-farm composting rulemaking. I have an update on that, and that's work we're working on with the coalition called Poultry Farmers for Compost Foraging, our small but mighty industry of compost foragers. That's farms that import food residuals and then have their chicken raised and foraged on the compost pile. That's called compost foraging. I'm sure you all have become a little bit familiar with that over the years. And those who are new to that, it's a lot of fun to talk about that with lawmakers across the building. So we had the coalition been working on legalizing that is an agricultural practice even to accept food residuals on farm. And then the agency, as part of that mandate in Act 41, had the task to also write rules so that as a new agricultural practice, that's why it's also an innovative agricultural practice that we want to promote now, we have the rules in our hands. So the deadline for drafting the rule was January 1st, 2023. And unfortunately, the report that was issued on that that you find not under January 16th date, but under the January 9th date online doesn't feature an outlook on when rules may be expected, and doesn't even mention that the deadline was passed. So we are afraid that we might lose another year in organizing workshops on the issue and really rolling it out as an innovative agricultural practice for basically producing soil amendments, what it is in the law, a valuable resource to enhance soils, compost that is. And yeah, we would like to see that really be promoted by the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. And of course, we also understand that the rollout of such a new program may be delayed for many reasons, but the stakeholders we working with kind of make the majority of the practitioners in the state, and we submitted our draft rule in April last year. So I don't see why we can't have a final rule in place that, of course, can be amended at a later point in time. Then related to this issue is kind of the back end of all of that, PFAS, microplastics contamination, and food residuals management. This is where we have a broader coalition with stakeholders of environmental groups like VPIRG and the Compost Association of Vermont is part of it, and a new nonprofit that's only focusing on food waste, zero waste. That is part of the Protect Our Soils Coalition. And here we work to kind of secure the market even for on-farm composting and community scale composting of food residuals by advocating for regulating depackaging technology, strengthening the source separation requirement and the hierarchy for organics management in the universal recycling law. So last year we advocated for the passage of Act 170 that installed a stakeholder group that discussed the role of depackagers in managing food waste. This final report is also available online now. And depackaging technology is basically a practice that has been permitted, even though it's not even known by law, where instead of source separating the residual from its packaging, so someone has an outdated deli item, takes the clamshell, opens the clamshell and throws the wrap into the compost and puts the clamshell in the recycling bin. Instead of doing that, having a zero sort service provider like Casella, offering a zero sort service for food residuals, taking all the stuff mixed together and then sending it through a magical machine that does it all mechanically. And the great concern is that by doing that, there's a lot of microplastics that are being created in the threshing process, and those microplastics enter the water stream and the soil and food stream through land application of the digestates in the end of the process. So it has to be regulated, and our coalition has made recommendations, and we're happy to talk about that more with you anytime. Part of the recommendations is to ban land application of the digestates from this industry. We think it should only find a place somewhere in construction probably, but never in food production or other crop producing soils. So that is another subject for research to find really where to even use these likely highly hazardous materials. But for now, I think the legislation could go ahead to simply ban the land application from those digestates, and really policy and guidance really enforce strict source separation so that there is even a pathway for returning organics meaningfully in a as clean as possible with quality insurance way to agricultural soils through smaller community scale systems.
Pause for questions. On-farm composting. Okay, no questions, looks like.
I hope that if the committee is interested in learning more about this, the stakeholder that represented our coalition in this work around the depackaging stakeholder group is Tom Gilbert. He's a farmer and owner of Black Dirt Farm. And I'm sure he'd be the best person to speak more deeply around that work and engagement in that stakeholder group specifically.
Okay, thank you. Make a note of that.
And then
Representative Templeman.
Yeah, sorry, directly speaking to the compost foraging, if we're still on that subject. So you had a deadline of January 1st to submit a bill or something. So, I mean, we're on a different timeline. Could we submit this bill for you?
This is Representative Templeman. This was the deadline of our Agency of Agriculture to file for the rule making of the rules that would basically flesh out what you already had passed in support of this practice. So the General Assembly already passed a law that says we want to see this practice. This is now an agricultural practice. But before it can really happen legally well, I mean, there's interim rules in place, don't get me wrong. But of course, everybody is curious what will be the rules actually for agriculture. And so would you, like, I'm considering, frankly, for my own business development also one day, investing in a community scale composting facility is a big undertaking. And I'm sure many kind of wait for that clarity of the agriculture rules, not the Agency of Natural Resources rules, to be in place. So, and that draft rule we haven't seen yet. And we already submitted our recommendations for that as a coalition last year, April.
Thank you for clarification.
Thank you for the question.
Okay.
Then the last issue that is just so very important, but please, of course, understand rural Vermont as being such a small actor in the big whole here, land, capital, and housing. We're also very much just learning on this and trying to navigate what's even ongoing. What we want to flag there is that, you know, long-term secure access to land, capital, and appropriate housing are some of the most pressing issues we're all facing, not just here locally, but also globally. and that there's so many ongoing efforts that you all should consider, and especially also the Milk with Dignity program and migrant justice. Hear from Everytown, the Land Access and Opportunity Board, and tune into that and how that effort is going on for land access. Of course, the Farm to Plate Network as a stakeholder who channels so much knowledge on the field. And what I wanted to share is that I was personally trying to get kind of involved and just know what the lay in the land is and what are the policy solutions on this pressing issues. And I just wanted to share that it seemed like even on this issue, it's hard to get to the root of the program and how basically the currently rather unregulated market development, how that actually circumvents the public interest and goals to keep the working lands open and free from development, and how to get agricultural fields effectively in those hands of land managers, beginning farmers, homesteaders also, who want to really practice good land stewardship, how to make that possible through regulation and policy considerations in that. I feel like in the US in general, there's sort of it's not part of our worldview to think that we want to regulate the market like a housing market. But I think like the wealth gap, the increasing wealth gap, and the affordability issues for Vermonters around this pressing issue, and then as well the working lands and how to get farmers into agriculture and stuff. That's all kind of crying for a need of a regulatory solution as well. Of course, conservation easements, current use program, that comes to mind in this context, but those are all voluntary programs. And I think maybe many questions in this, the question is voluntary still appropriate given the climate emergency? Recently, a Rural Vermont board member shared that in Norway, all agricultural fields have to remain in agricultural use and that a property can only be sold if that can be assured in the transaction. In Germany, the building code prohibits urban sprawl and only allows farmers and a couple of other uses that serve a public interest to develop infrastructure and housing outside of town centers. Just examples, just to maybe there's expertise needed to look abroad on these issues and what other policies and regulations are in place. You know, Norway, for example, is the wealthiest country in the European Union. And has such a policy in place. Of course, you can't reinvent the wheel in the US, but I'm sure there's some levers here that are not talked about yet in this context. And then lastly, the small farm, but just maybe stop here again if there's questions on that, and then I only have the small farm action days.
I don't see any questions, so why don't you go ahead?
Can I quickly add to that, Caroline, just on the housing and land?
Yeah, of course.
Capital. I think I think 2017, Rural Vermont did a sort of community conversations tour, and we went around to 6 stops around the state trying to get some, geographic representation. And I think just for your understanding, some of the issues we predominantly heard about from people are not what you might consider traditional agricultural issues. It wasn't like we really need parity pricing, which gets back to, I think, the question around PES and like what kind of structural reforms we need, or we really need technical assistance. Although some of the things were brought up, what we heard mostly was healthcare, childcare, transportation, housing, land. Like these are issues that affect everybody in Vermont, but they might disproportionately affect some communities. In the case of farmers, we certainly know that's the case with healthcare and childcare. We're hearing more and more, as from other people in different parts of the workforce and food web, that housing, I know Caroline talked a lot about land, but housing is such a critical issue. Where are people housing their farm workers? Where are farmers themselves? Even if you get a piece of land, there's a lot of restrictions on building new housing on that land for yourself or for other people who might want to farm differently in that land. So I just wanted to quickly point that out, that one of the reasons you'll hear us talking about these issues, which may not be normally issues you'd hear about in this committee, is because we've heard loud and clear from our community over time that these are some of the most pressing issues they're all facing. Back to you, Caroline.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that addition. So yeah, Small Farm Action Days. That's a format we do in partnership with NOFA Vermont and other organizations, and that we want to continue to host this year in person at the State House. We hope it to be a monthly event between February and April, and where we create basically opportunities for citizen advocates from our local agrarian communities. And we say it this way particular because we not always just represent farmers that make basically a commercial living from farming, but anyone who participates in our food web to become more resilient is meaningful in doing so, and has a voice in the process. We find. And that's why we often speak of agrarian communities in that context. We also more explicitly invite youth this year to this series to participate, as there's the new Futures Caucus and also the Youth Council that we have some connections to. And we just really welcome that young leadership in all these processes. And I think there will be great stories to be shared also on agricultural issues from those in committee. So we hope to have basically committee time with you, ideally as a joint committee. That's how we've done it in the past. Then we don't have to repeat ourselves and wander from both committees in the same day. Would be great to schedule it on the same day. And we are in communication with your committee assistants about that already. But of course, this all stands and falls also with your committee's interest in the format, and we hope for your support.
Thank you. We're challenged a little bit on space for joint committee hearings without having, we have the remote option, and we're trying to figure out whether that's the most effective way for us as committee folks, I think, to learn and absorb knowledge. And there's at the same time, we want to, make sure that we're using your time effectively. So we'll be working on that, I guess.
That sounds good. And just for you, for the benefit of the possibility and feasibility, we don't anticipate that everyone who might want to participate in the committee time, where farmers and others directly speak to issues, have to be in person. That might be hybrid, but there will be also a smaller group that is in person, where folks also want to just learn about the legislative process in general. Not all of those guests would have to be speaking necessarily. And I hope that the early contact we have, that we still have a chance to get maybe a larger room for a joint committee. We have been meeting in larger rooms for this purpose before, which was of course great, and is even more welcome today, I understand. And if we need to do it more remotely, if that's the preference, we're all open to that discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Graham?
Only there's a couple more items that Carolyn was going to pass back to me. I know we have 5 minutes, but maybe I can just round out if that's okay. So there's maybe a number of issues you're like, well, I didn't hear about this. For example, there's been an ongoing, I would just say, crisis in the dairy industry for a number of decades now, and especially in organic dairy now. I've been sitting a number of the state-based meetings around this. We also work with the National Family Farm Coalition, which has, I'm trying to remember the name of their federal legislation, Milk from Family Farms Act, which Senator Sanders has been the introducer of in the past. We don't know if he'll be introducing it this year, but it is a farm bill year nationally. So just to know, we also have a member of Organic Valley on our board and technical service providers who work with dairy farmers. And so we are in touch with these conversations. We work very closely with NOFA Vermont too. So we are also hearing updates from them. Universal School Meals. This is a big coalition of groups. We always sign into those programs. Part of the way rural Vermont determines how we get our work done is what issues don't have voices speaking for them. Who sort of needs a voice, and how can our work be most potent and most powerful? So there might be some big issues. You're like, oh, it's interesting, rural Vermont isn't there, but you might see we're a sign-on or we're involved in some way. But if you have a question, please feel free to ask. So that's just, and I'd say that also goes for the healthcare, the childcare, those types of things. We're certainly not experts in those fields, but our job we see is to elevate the voices of our community members into those conversations and the principles of our organization into those conversations. So you'll be seeing a workshop on childcare at the NOFA conference with some national farm-based childcare educators and Let's Grow Kids participating as a way to sort of organize amongst farmers around that. For example, we know there's a universal primary care bill, which will be moving again here this year. So you'll see us involved in some of that work. One of the issues that wasn't mentioned was cannabis here, and you will be one of the primary movers on bills related to that in the State House. We're part of a coalition with the Northeast Organic Farmers Association, with Vermont Racial Justice Alliance, Vermont Growers Association, and the Green Mountain Patients Alliance, which is sort of the membership-based group for medical nurses and providers in the state. So our work has, since 2020 now, I think we've all been a coalition, been around assuring a racially just, economically equitable, and agriculturally accessible cannabis market. So there's a number of things related to that. Currently, for example, there's no amount of the revenue from this marketplace going towards repairing the impacts of criminalization on communities that are disproportionately harmed. So we're looking to get 15% of the revenue to invest in a fund that can be directed by those communities. There's currently no funding actually supporting the current fund in law for achieving social equity. So we're looking for amounts of that funding to actually go towards permanently funding that fund. As you might know, it's incredibly difficult for farmers to access growing this market because there's a number of restrictions federally, which are certainly hard to affect here. We are having conversations with the federal delegation around this and the Cannabis Control Board and numerous policymakers and farmers who've been impacted, even to the extent of having being threatened by NRCS and the Land Trust to have their farms taken from them if they were to continue with the application process in Vermont. We'll be sharing those stories with the federal delegation just so they can understand how the people who grow plants and are already economically marginalized are not essentially allowed to access one of the most profitable plants that we can grow in our culture right now. And there are some things we can do at the local level, which you will definitely hear from me about. I'm happy to share documents about that, but some of those things will include direct market access for smaller producers and the public, scale appropriate licensing, the social equity pieces I mentioned, and others. And I think that might be it for now.
Representative Temple.
On the federal level, do you have a general sense of or opinion as to when you feel that federal legalization may happen, timeline?
Gosh, I think our coalition member, Jeffrey from the Vermont Growers Association, he's a member of a national coalition of organizations working at the grassroots level in different states around the country, and they're working on national legislation. They actually developed a cannabis bill that they introduced last year federally. He would have an idea of what bills are out there and what the likelihood of them passing is. But in a conversation with some of Senator Sanders' folks the other day, it was acknowledged that it will probably be a little bit of time before a federal legalization program rolls out. What we would be seeking would be for the federal government to essentially say in the Farm Bill that in states in which recreational cannabis has been legalized, that it can be recognized as farming. The federal government will not penalize farmers or not allow farming organizations to provide services which are achieved from federal dollars. They won't put barriers between that, and they won't threaten farms, and they'll essentially allow them to be treated as agriculture in each state, which we hope would be a bipartisan effort, given that many red states are very agricultural and some of them have become recreational states, and many blue states where recreational has been allowed or also have similar goals around supporting small farms, et cetera. So I feel like it's a very bipartisan type of thing, but we've also been encouraged just to acknowledge that bipartisanship is rare right now at the federal level, and that the Farm Bill is a very slow process and a tight one. So, but it's worth, I think, having the conversation, at least letting them know about what's happening on the ground. We hear almost every day from people who are like, I'm working in my town and all of a sudden my greenhouse is supposed to comply with fire standards from the town, and my equipment shed is supposed to be compliant with fire standards, but they are agricultural buildings. So there's this risk of people even beginning to, from a farm perspective, engage in this, because all of a sudden parts of their farm might be impacted by Act 250 that weren't before, or impacted by local regulations that there weren't before, et cetera. We're hoping that we've been told from the CCB that there will be a bill which would make all forms of outdoor production in Vermont hopefully have a number of the agricultural exemptions, which would at least begin to exempt them from some of those municipal oversight and requirements, which to some extent are just ridiculous in the nature of how they're impacting people who are just trying to participate at a small scale.
Good. We better, I guess, wrap it up there. And thank you for coming in and sharing these priorities. I mean, it's helpful for us to hear what they are, and also just to get a little bit of grounding in the policies themselves, because it's in some cases new for many of us. And we'll be digging into that more. And as I said, hope that we'll have a chance to see you and Caroline to see you in person.
You'll be there. Yeah, see you. Thank you so much for the time speaking with you today, and we're looking forward to meet you all in person very soon. And
Okay.
I'll show up tomorrow.
All right, well, thank you. Thank you, guys.
You're very welcome. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now that wraps it up for today. Thank you, committee.
Swipe your card for these guys.
Yeah. Tomorrow, tomorrow we're gonna,
So you weren't.
It's nice to meet you in person.
You do too now.
9:15 here,
Sorry, I missed it.
and we're gonna have legislative council back in, Ellen is coming back in. She had a time limitation when she was with us today, talking about land use, so statute Act 250 and how it relates to agriculture. And we're going to be picking up on that conversation again. And then we've got folks from NOFA Vermont coming in to say hello, introduce themselves. Not sure about the next hour. In the afternoon, we're going to hear from several people on the work of the Climate Council. So that will be
12:45 or 1.
that's one. Yeah, and that'll take us through the afternoon until we're on the House floor at 3. So we won't be in the chamber at all